Hi there, this is Chef Bill at the Culinary Institute of America. Today I'd like to share one of my favorite recipes with you. These are stuffed olives that have been braised in an exotic tasting tomato sauce, but all you need to know, meatballs and tomato sauce, and who doesn't love that? Let's get started by making the sauce, and it begins like so many other tomato sauces. Olive oil goes into the pan, and then I'm going to take and cook some onions and a little bit of garlic. Really what I'm looking for here is to make sure that the onions have turned translucent. The garlic, on the other hand, you want to be a little careful with. Don't brown it because it will, at the end of the day, become bitter if it gets browned. All right, so we've got a nice sizzle going on here. I'm going to add some of this curry powder to the hot oil. And I'm going to add some paprika. Now you can't appreciate this, but the aroma just blossomed into this room. I just want to wake up those flavors a little bit. And then we'll introduce crushed tomatoes. Now, so that this has the opportunity to cook for 10 minutes or so, I'm going to add a little bit of water. And that water gives me a little bit of time. It allows it to simmer for a little bit longer. I want the tomatoes to break down and give up their flavor. I want the onions to soften even further. As I said, this will take about 10 minutes. Now, let me just move that off the heat for just a second. And I'll show you what I've got here. I have this sauce basically finished. I simmered it for about 10 minutes. I waited until the tomatoes had fallen apart. And then in terms of flavoring, let me show you 3 ingredients. I've got chopped capers, which give it a wonderful salty, sort of herbaceous quality. I've got something called preserved lemon, which is a lemon that's been preserved in brine. And that is an ingredient that is very typical in Tunisia. They came up with a wonderful technique of preserving lemons. I have some preserved lemons right over here. Basically, what's happened to these, I'll share it with you quickly, it's easy to do. They've taken lemons and they've cut them almost all the way through, just like this, so that you can open it up like a little bit of a blossom, okay? And then those lemons get packed into a non-reactive jar. We use glass here. And you make a brine. So let's say you have 18 lemons in here. You make a brine with 6 cups of water and 3 cups of salt. Bring it to a boil, pour it over the top, and then you just wait for about 6 weeks. If you open it up, what you'll discover is that the flesh will peel away from the rind very, very easily, just like that. And the rind itself will become translucent. It'll lose all that white, chalky quality. These are going to be salty, so rinse them and then dice them in small pieces. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, I've added some white beans. These are cooked white beans. I cooked them with onions and herbs, and I'm going to take the onions and herbs out here and just discard it. And I've taken those beans and I add them to the sauce. This sauce can be done ahead. I would say you could make this a week ahead. It lives very happily in the refrigerator. Off to the side, we can move forward to the rest of the dish, which is basically a stuffed olive. I actually think of them more like meatballs that have an olive on the inside. But either way, we need to get the filling started. So here's what I have in front of me. This is parsley and onions that have been cooked together in olive oil until the onions are translucent, the parsley turns a dark green, and then I've chilled this down so it's not too hot. I'm going to add to that some ground chicken. And in the past, I've done this with veal, I've done it with turkey, I've done it with lamb, but this is dark meat chicken that I'm using here. I'm going to add some breadcrumbs, just to absorb some of the moisture that comes out of the chicken. I'm going to bind this with an egg. And then I'm going to put 2 different cheeses in here. One of them is Gruyere that's been grated, so a Swiss cheese. And the other is feta cheese that's been crumbled. And that is our filling. Now, you want to mix it all up. If you decide that your filling is a little bit too wet, then you can always add more breadcrumbs to it. You probably won't need to season it with salt because the feta cheese is pretty salty in its own right, but maybe a little bit of pepper would be good. I've got olives here. These are big king olives. You can find them, typically they come pitted. The larger the better from my perspective. They come pitted. What I do is I cut them top to bottom halfway through so that I can open it, just like this. For shaping these olives and stuffing these olives, and stuffing is a little bit of a misnomer. Some of the stuffing will go inside, but some will be on the outside. So think of these really as meatballs. What I do, I've got some flour here. I'm going to put a little bit of flour in my hand. I'm going to get one of these olives, and I'm going to take a tablespoon or so of this filling, and I'm going to try and force as much into the olive as I can. And then the balance, I will shape around the outside. And so while there will be stuffing in there, there's as much stuffing on the outside of the olive. And the flour may help you a little bit, keep it from sticking to your hands. Also, it'll make it so that you can shape it nice and even and round. So there's one. Now, I want to make sure that these meatballs hold together. And the way to do that is to not just dredge them in flour, but dip them into egg and then fry them a little bit so that they turn golden on the outside. If this were a Chinese recipe, they'd use chopsticks for doing it. I'm going to use 2 forks, and it always seems to work pretty well for me. So flour's on there already, then into egg, and then right into hot olive oil. And I'll get all of these olives into the oil. And those will take probably 5 minutes. And once they're cooked, the outside will hold all of the filling into place. So let's see how we're doing here. There's already some color on there. So I'll flip it over. Okay, once these are browned, once they're golden all around the outside, we'll take them out. And this recipe is finished by taking these meatballs, putting them into the sauce that we've already got made, and heating them together for about 10 minutes or so. A quick 10 minutes, and then this is ready to be served. In Tunisia, oftentimes you'll see this garnished with roasted peppers, green peppers, slightly hot, that have been roasted and peeled. But for my taste, a little bit of chopped parsley or a little bit of cilantro, or maybe some of both, I think would be entirely appropriate. And this dish of stuffed olives that have been braised in an exotic tomato sauce that has white beans in it, I think checks off all of the big points. It's delicious, it's unique, it is healthy, it is inexpensive to make, and a lot of the work can be done ahead. As I said, I think you'll return to this recipe again and again.